Hello, happy Tuesday, everyone. Welcome to our weekly live stream talking about digital transformation and all things related to the people, process, and technology aspects of digital transformation. I'm going to introduce my guest here in just a second, but just real quickly, a couple logistical things. We're streaming live today on YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn. So if you're watching on any of those platforms, I'm watching the streams as we're going here. So be sure to drop any questions you have for our guest or for me. Drop any questions in the chat as we get going here. And I'd love to take live questions, and that's part of why we do these live interviews, is just to get some live interaction. And I certainly have my questions I'll start with, but would love to hear any questions or comments that the audience has here. So I'll keep an eye on the live stream here. If you have questions along the way, please feel free to chat them in the live stream, and we'll get to your questions as we go through the conversation here. We do these weekly interviews that become part of my Transformation Ground Control podcast. So we film the interviews live, we edit them, we polish them, we put them into kind of a packaged version of the Transformation Ground Control podcast. So the benefit of watching it live is you miss out on, you don't have to see all the polished version. You can see the raw interview in action, which makes it kind of fun. So excited for that. And so today's topic, though, what we want to talk about today is this is one of a series of interviews that I wanted to have on the show where we talk about people that are in the midst of a transformation. It's one thing to look back fondly on a 2-year journey or however long your transformation might be, and you can certainly look back at the good, the bad, the ugly. But there's something about looking at a transformation as it's unfolding real time, as it's happening, as you're in the trenches, as you're experiencing some of those challenges in real time, that can be very beneficial in terms of lessons learned and whatnot. So that's part of what we wanted to do here today. And so what I did today is invited a guest who is actually a client of ours, and it is Doug Hanson, who's the director of ERP for a company called Polyconcepts North America. And I'll let him introduce himself and his company and tell us a little bit about what his background is and what his company does. But again, questions along the way, please feel free to jump in with any questions you have. And if you don't mind, before I introduce our guest, just drop in the chat where you're joining from today. I'd love to see where our global audience is, and it gives us a sense of where you're all joining from. So just tell us what country or what city you're in. Just give us a good sense of who our audience is here today. So that all being said, Doug Hanson, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Eric. Good to be here. Appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah, glad to have you here today. So I guess just to start, maybe tell us first of all a little bit about you and your background, and then I'll shift gears and ask you about Polyconcepts here in a second.
Yeah, I've been with PCNA just 2 years, and although I've been doing ERP full life cycle stuff for 30 plus at lots of different companies. Right now, I'm leading the ERP strategy as well as all the business applications across multiple divisions, multiple sites, multiple P&Ls, brand names. My job is really to make sure we engage with the right software that'll meet the business strategy.
Right. Okay, great. And then I'm going to come back to a little bit more about your background here in a second. But before I do that, tell us about Polyconcepts North America. What does Polyconcepts do? What's sort of your business model?
Sure. Yeah, we're a top 4 supplier in the promotional products industry. So we make the swag that everybody used to get before COVID at the trade shows, et cetera. So we are a top 4 supplier. Our primary customers are large distributors like 4Imprint, Staples, some of those. But we also sell straight to the market on our pcna.com website. And we make everything from apparel, golf shirts, to backpacks and other general swag. And we brand it with corporate logos.
Right. And you were telling me right before we went live here today that during COVID, you've had a lot of corporate business that's come from people giving care packages and whatnot to employees that are working remotely or employees that maybe you're not interacting with every day. Tell us a little bit about that. It sounds like that's driving some of your growth in recent months.
It really has. I mean, it's been, kind of good and bad with COVID, but we've had to really, really respond. For example, a lot of corporations have work from home policies for the last 18 to 20 months. So a lot of companies have, as return to work is starting up, there's care packages being sent. So we offer a sure ship service. where if you've got 100 employees or 20,000, we'll send a care package, drop ship it straight to their home. And I think it goes a long way towards getting people revved up and ready to go back to work.
Yeah, makes them feel connected to the business, even though they're not physically there every day necessarily.
Yep,
Yeah,
absolutely.
interesting. Okay, so with Polyconcept, then why did Polyconcept decide to embark on a digital transformation? Maybe what was the problem statement, or what was the situation you were trying to address by thinking about a transformation like this?
Well, we've got a lot going on in IT and a lot of projects. And one of the reasons I'm here is to try to sort out the strategy and lay in sort of a sequence that makes sense. And maybe not starting with ERP, but at least knowing what our vision is for ERP is fundamental. We just invested a large amount of money and time building our new website. And we've got other edge apps, including things like Salesforce and manufacturing execution systems and financial systems and reporting systems. Those are all in flight. We want to look at this as one of the key priorities is obviously to grow that top line growth, sales. So we need customer facing solutions out there, and that's in flight. We're well along the path to doing that. So it's really time to start looking at our ERP strategy. We've got, like I said, multiple brand names all running separate P&Ls, which creates a large challenge with integration. If we want to share resources or inventory across our brand names with different ERPs, we've got several. It's hard to connect those. So we need to lay a groundwork, a strategy. So as we're building all the edge systems, we're building them with the knowledge of what our ERP, our transaction systems are going to look like, right? So we're forward compatible, and that's what we're doing right now.
Right. Okay. Yeah, that's interesting. So really just getting a broader view of all of your systems you have now and what you're kind of going to shift to longer term, and just having that clear vision laid out and the strategy laid out. Is that sort of a summary of what you're trying to accomplish?
Absolutely. And we've got a couple of smaller divisions. We've already gone live with one down at our Charlotte facility. It's a company called Journal Books, which is in our portfolio. They went live during COVID, supported remotely. It went flawlessly. We took advantage of the fact that we did have capacity, human capacity at the shop while the revenues were down. So rather than let people take time off, we put them to work doing ERP. So we were successful there. We've also got another smaller startup that we're going to roll out here in the next 1 or 2 quarters. So we're going to try to start small and proof of concept, and then build out the ERP platforms, forward. That's
Right.
what we're doing right now.
Now, was it hard to get internal buy-in and management support at a time when your revenues were softer than you would have liked? Was that a difficult thing, or was it sort of a no-brainer to say, hey, let's focus on something we wouldn't otherwise have time for?
PCNA is a fantastic company. They're really forward thinking. They knew this wasn't going to last forever. We've been lucky and a very profitable business. So the rainy day finally came, and it was the right time. And I think the leadership of the company was kind of wise enough to know it's time to buckle down and do some of these investments right now, or at least start the process up, so that we can beat the competition when everybody wakes up from COVID, which is what we intend to do.
Right. It's
Yeah,
good. So you're getting aggressive and using it as an opportunity to get ahead, really, rather than staying put where you are in the industry.
absolutely.
That's great. Um, so you started to answer this question a little bit when you were talking about some of the revenue growth that you're trying to accomplish. Which, by the way, before I get to my real question, I think that's super interesting that you say that, because most of the time when you hear of ERP implementation or digital transformation, a lot of times organizations are thinking about reducing cost. How can I be more efficient? How can I scale? How can I do more with less, or whatever? But you guys are really looking at this as not just that, but also a sort of that customer facing side. How can we sell more? How can we increase revenue?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so, you can, and like I said, I've done a lot of these, and sometimes it's more of a cost takeout. the point of view. But our point of view on this is, treat the customers like you want to be treated, obviously, have great processes where it makes it easier for customers to do business and especially repeat business with us. Take those revenues and eventually then talk about optimizing and taking cost out. Go get that revenue, make a happy customer base and grow it. And the cost takeout will come with scale. If we can build scalable solutions, just naturally we're going to get more profitable as we grow.
Right. So in addition to that, that revenue growth and making happy customers and repeat customers and that sort of thing, are there other goals that you and your team have for this transformation, or sort of high level objectives you're trying to accomplish?
Yeah, one of the things, we're very high volume. Like I say, we do thousands and thousands of shipments every day out of all of our plants, lots and lots of them. Our turn times to print a product can be hours. We don't measure things in days. So efficiency of that process from customer order through delivery and sending the tracking information up to our website and out to our customers, that needs to be compressed. And in a high volume situation, you really don't want to have a pause in the process. So we didn't start out this big. We're a amalgamation of several acquisitions through the years and other things. So processes weren't built for this kind of scale in some cases. And the ERP systems that are here, some of them are 15, 20 years old, right? So there was no sort of chain of custody sort of built into the ERP. Warehouse management systems weren't as robust as a lot of the modern platforms are now. So we need to take advantage of some of that, and that'll shrink that time down to process each of these orders and eliminate a lot of touches.
Right. Now, you mentioned the acquisitions that you've had as an organization and some of the brand names you've acquired and sort of folded into the PCNA umbrella. Is there an initiative to, as part of this project or maybe in parallel, to standardize or create common business processes across those different brands? Or are you letting them sort of remain independently operated or sort of semi-decentralized? Or how is that going to work as far as how it all comes together?
There's sort of no proactive process right now where we're trying to standardize processes. We don't want to kill the goodness of some of the brand names. For example, our apparel businesses operate a little different than what we call our hard goods, whether it's a vacuum bottle or a backpack. Apparel has got its own quirks, right? So we don't want to come in and engineer processes and mandate certain gates in the process that may not make sense to a product. Right. We need to connect, at the data at the higher level in terms of things like being able to share workload around the plants and that kind of level. But at the individual plant level, we're not going to kind of mandate it's got to be exactly the same. And frankly, we haven't decided whether we're going to have one common ERP platform across. We just need them to talk to each other, right? So we're going to take them on a case by case. Now, if we pick a great ERP that'll work for one business, there's a very high likelihood the blueprinting for the next business will go short, and it'll become obvious that, that's the right decision. Whether we create a single instance or multiple instances of the same ERP is really to be determined. We're still early in that journey.
Yeah. So you really do have an open mind in terms of determining, based on what kind of technologies are evaluated and which ones ultimately are selected and implemented, that would sort of determine whether or not that becomes a common platform.
And it goes back to, we're top line motivated right now, right? So we're not going to pull the guts out of a great business that's making money just to standardize it, right?
Right.
Yeah.
So before I get to my next question, just a couple, just to sort of touch base back with our audience here. I had asked you to sort of drop in the chat box where you're listening in from today or where you're joining us from. We've got people all over the world here today. We've got Cleveland, Ohio, United Kingdom, Vietnam, Toronto, Myanmar. So people all over the world. So appreciate everyone joining here today.
Shout out to Toronto. We've got a facility up there. called Trimark, and we like our Canadian friends, and we also have a facility called T-shirt and Sons over in the UK. So
Oh, there you
shout
go.
out to Dover, UK as well.
Yeah, so you've got your geographic coverage is covered here too. Yeah, it looks like we've got a couple people from UK actually. So thanks everyone for joining. And again, drop any chat or drop any questions you might have in the chat box here, and we'll get to those questions here as we go. Um, so I know you're early in the digital transformation journey, but just so far, based on what you're seeing so far and where you are right now, sort of looking around you in the trenches as you're sort of entering the battlefield, if you will, of transformation. What are some of the early lessons that you're finding, like things that are kind of standing out as big ahas or surprises or just general lessons?
Well, first of all, the ERP journey is not an IT-led project. It's a business strategy that needs to be 100% supported by the executives and the ownership or the corporation, whichever style you're used to. And we have that here. It's 100% business driven, strategically aligned. So that's a good thing. What are some of the things that has made us think? Well, the other thing that I brought when I came on here is, like I said, experience doing ERPs, and there was a little bit of a shock when they found out we're going to have to take the best talent out of the business for an extended period of time to go do this journey, right? You don't get to just sit in a meeting and say, here's how you want it to look, and then wake up in a year and have a new ERP. This is a full-time job for multiple people from multiple functions, so that you build it correct.
Right. So that's interesting. So how, at a high level, then, if you don't mind sharing, just rough order of magnitude, how many team members do you have that are full time on the project, or maybe are there others that are part time on top of that, or how does that team composition look right now?
Well, right now, like I said, we're still early. I don't want to give out numbers because some of the people may or may not have been invited to be on the team quite yet. So we're early in it. But for some of the smaller sites that we've already gone live, we tend to outsource the sort of technical work, right? But we keep the business process mapping and the power user involvement in-sourced. In other words, internal resources. So for smaller sites, I'd have 8 to 9 people engaged business, a couple IT people just to handle interfaces and reports, the classic RICE, and then we pull in consultants to do the configuration and all the work that hopefully only needs to be done once um, along the journey.
Gotcha. Okay. Um, you question we have from the audience, which is actually a really good one, and it sort of dovetails into that talk about the team and this whole concept of embarking on a transformation while revenues are low and at a time when there's so much uncertainty in the world. But how? So this is from Lippy on LinkedIn. She asks, "I'd be interested to know how long is your transformation journey, and how do you keep the motivation going?" So do you know
Yeah.
yet how transformation will be, and have you had any issues yet? Sort of keeping that momentum and that motivation high for the team that you have.
So I'll start by saying we are not going to go in with a mindset that we're going to make the software fit the business. Sorry about that. We're going to go in fitting the business to the software, right? So one of the reasons that we're in such a bind right now is because we've got 15 or 20 years worth of customization done on old platforms, which is unsustainable. It just gets more expensive over time. So one of the good things we did up front is convinced ourselves, along with the leadership team, that we're going to, whatever we pick, it better be 80, 90% of what we need, because we're not going to modify it, right?
Mhm.
And if something doesn't work, we'll redo the process to fit the software so that we can run out of the box for the most part, right? So with that as a prerequisite, these things can, like I said, we've got a half a dozen divisions. Some of the larger divisions can go in less than a year, right? You can do these in 9 or 10 months. Smaller divisions, 6 or 7 months, depending, right? How do you keep people motivated? Um, there needs to be some high level of recognition. There really needs to be some incentive type packages built into this, because remember, they're leaving their job. They're leaving the security of, where they were the top dog in a department, and now they're going to be a SME and taken out of the grid for 9 months or 12, depending on how much. So we've considered all those things, and they are the future thought leaders and leaders of the organization. So we need to treat them as such.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And I'm sure as you go, you'll learn, as you get into the thick of the transformation, you'll learn how to keep people motivated. And I imagine different people are motivated by different tactics and strategies that you might have.
It's been tough, to be honest. Like I said, I've been doing this for years, and it's kind of a Silicon Valley startup mode, kind of thought process. You show up, you team up, you do whatever. You're drinking coffee sometimes late at night to stay awake, but you kind of work together as a team. COVID's created some interesting challenges. That dynamic using teams, to have your daily calls and things is a little harder. But we pulled it off. Well, it took a lot of people time to get used to kind of a remote effort, but we didn't find that it added more than 10 or 15% to a schedule.
Interesting.
So far, it's been pretty efficient.
Yeah, in some ways, I imagine there might be some cases like we've seen with some clients where you can actually speed up some things because you don't have to wait to meet in person and schedule easier at times. But you're also less productive or less effective at times not being in person. So I imagine somewhat of a wash.
Yeah, going forward, and we're limping back in like everybody as far as COVID, but going forward, we definitely will have, sort of 1 week on, 2 weeks off site. You got to have that FaceTime. You got to have the dynamic where you're in a conference room, mapping processes on the wall, and agreeing on things as a group. And it's a lot easier to do in person. But there's also a lot of work that can be done remote.
Right.
Got to parse it out a little bit differently.
Yeah. The good news with COVID is it sort of forces transformation teams to realize or figure out the things that you can do remotely or that you don't need to be, in person or whatever the case may be.
It's funny because, and this is a little off the tangent a little bit here, but we've learned to do all of our support functions, whether it's finance or planning, or we've learned to do all that remote, right? So as we're building out and mapping ERP processes during COVID, we've kind of got an eye towards how will this work without having somebody be able to see a process. Can they run this thing? Are we engineering the process right for the future workforce, whatever it's going to look like?
Right.
It's a different perspective than the old days when everybody could just walk down to the factory and see the process. It's different.
Right. Yeah. Different mindset for sure.
Yeah.
So what, I'm going to come back. I have some questions for you about your past experience with ERP implementations, digital transformations, and I'll tie this question back to that as well in a second. But maybe just in general, as we talk about PCNA in particular, what have you found is working best for you so far? I mean, what are the things where you feel like, okay, we've really got this dialed in, and these are the things we're doing really well, and it seems to be working for us. What kind of jumps out at you?
I think we've got good governance. So we've got a cadence set up with the leadership team. If there's any big questions about scope creep, budget, those kind of big levers, we've got a process to resolve those quickly. The team's empowered to make the tactical decisions every day. We don't need to ask permission, but the strategic ones, there is a process. And we've got strong funding, strong support. All that stuff was done up front for each of these various divisions that we're looking at. And like I said, we're in a different phase for each of them, but strong across the board support from the senior level. So there's no skepticism about whether this is the right thing to do, which is a death killer to a project. If you got a skeptical leader coming in questioning, then the first slip up, you're going to be thrown off the bus somewhere. That's not going to happen here.
Right. So you've got clear governance, you've got the buy-in and support. It's pretty clear that your executive team is on board and supporting
Yeah.
this. That's impressive and interesting because we saw a pretty. If you look at all of our clients across the board, we had clients that fell into two sort of extremes. One were the ones that you're talking about, which is sort of like your situation where you used this as an opportunity, COVID as an opportunity to invest in technology and invest in the future, and then
Yeah.
others that were panicked, or fear driven that said, hey, we're going to cut, we're going to put the project on hold, we're not going to invest in technology right now until we get out of this. So it's interesting to kind of hear your perspective on that long-term play and that long-term perspective you guys have.
And I see Dave over in the chat has had a good comment. Process mapping is in reengineering is key for transformation. I agree 100%. The difference we're doing this time is we're doing those high level process maps up front, and we're finding out which of those processes really do move the needle on our strategy. And in the old style ERP, you'd go buy the software, and then the first 6 months you'd sit there and map everything out and configure the system. And to me, I've been around a long time, and that's a mistake. I think that was made for years, was to ignore what it is what your vision is. So setting the vision up front, agnostic of the platform. You don't need a platform solution to look at the business process and decide what's important. So having that locked in, you just whip it out and say, no, you said this was important, right? So we're
Right.
going to pick a piece of software that will move the needle for those important processes. So it's just a timing thing. Do it up front.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's especially with how flexible different systems are in the market today and the fact that really your business should be driving the technology. Back to your early point about this being a business initiative, not a technology initiative.
Yeah.
That is certainly in line with that philosophy for sure. What do you see as the biggest challenges so far? As you're sort of coming up on the horizon here of getting further into the transformation, what red flags are you seeing? What risks are you concerned about?
Yeah, I think organizationally, it's always going to be a challenge. There's this argument that if you go to each department and you say, I need a good resource to represent purchasing or whatever, if you're doing an ERP project or whatever the functions are, they're either going to give you their best and brightest, or they're going to give you somebody that's extra, somebody they can afford to do without. It's a bad idea to take the lower performer and stick them on your most important project, but that tends to happen. So one of the challenges is our governance process doesn't allow that to happen, right? So we're gonna have a process, and we're gonna engage HR, and we're gonna do our due diligence to make sure at each of the sites we've got the right people. And so sometimes you can't just pull them out, and we may have to delay a start until we can go do some hiring, some backfilling, which is all part of the cost of doing these things. Because you can't have people working part-time on an ERP project and then have their day job to worry about. It often doesn't work. It may work in a small deployment, but it wouldn't work in a larger scale, multi-hundreds of $1 million type division. It just won't work. Too much
Right.
going on. So that would be probably one of the biggest challenges.
Yeah, just making sure you've got the right resources and it's not just a number, but making sure you've got the A players and the people that I imagine are probably the hardest to pull out of your day-to-day operations are the ones you most likely are going to want on this project.
Yeah. And just sort of some insider baseball stuff, if there's any other IT people on here. The other challenge is sometimes you get kickback from internal IT teams because they don't like the technology or the platform or the database or some other thing, right? And it's a bit nerve-wracking for people that have been working sort of on the Microsoft stack for the last 10 years to say you're going to go off of that, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we can get in our own way a little bit too, and that's always a concern. What's going to happen to my job when this strategy gets rolled out, kind of thing. So we're working on that, the change management associated with that, and career pathing and all that. Good technical resources are very adaptive to technology. So we don't have that because we're mostly Microsoft stack centric right now, but in some of the smaller divisions, it's just a rip and replace, complete new technology. So
Right. Interesting. Okay. Um, how, so in terms of the change component of this project or this transformation, how big of a mindset shift, cultural shift, organizational shift, operational shift, how big of a change is this going to be for Polyconcept? Can you, I know you haven't gotten through all the details. There's a lot
Yeah,
you don't, but how do you think that'll play out?
it's going to be pretty large. One of the things that if you try to build an ERP that's touchless from order to shipment, so a lot of jobs are going to get a lot easier, and there's a few areas and functions that it might not get easier, right? And
Mm,
so the tough part is, telling somebody they've got to enter a data point so that we have that data that we can ship up to the website, for example, is extra work. And so the change management and trying to explain why this is important and how they're part of this process takes a little time. Not everybody is sort of an end-to-end process expert, but they know their area real well. So it does take a little upfront time to explain the vision end to end and see how their step adds value to the next step and so on. And in an integrated ERP, it's obvious to those of us that do it every day, but it's not to those that do a specific function.
right.
Yeah.
Now, compared to other implementations you've been involved with in your career, which I'm going to sort of lead into here, but how does this the magnitude of change here at Polyconcept, how would you compare that to other
Yeah.
implementations you've been involved with?
Much less here at PCNA, just because we're not mandating common processes. We're not
Mm,
putting a bunch of thou shalt do it this way out there. We know what our end game is, and we know what the high priority needle moving processes are. So we're going to focus on that. All the stuff in between may not matter. So, for example, at some other large corporations that I was employed at in the past, we would start it out and blueprint how you're going to be a manufacturer or a distributor or a repair division, whichever you were in a large corporation, and then everybody had to adapt to it. And in fact, sometimes these outliers were better processes, but we ignored them
mm,
because they were different. you
right.
know, so we're not really going down that path quite yet. So it's going to relieve a lot of the stress. I think we don't typically, when you get people in a room, they can figure out a process and how to make it work. You just don't allow software mods, but you can allow process changes. As long as the output meets the criteria, then how you get there is less important.
Yeah. 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 And I think that's interesting because it sounds like the valuing the flexibility and each of the brands to be able to service their customers the way they need to is more important than
Yeah.
being right. I hate to use the word right, but being right in terms of what the right answer is or the common answer is going to be for business processes. It sounds like that's less important than just making sure that you've got the flexibility and the visibility into the operations.
Yep. Exactly. Yep.
So is part of your transformation, by the way, is it looking at not just the core ERP system, but are you also looking at some of these edge technologies, like you mentioned, MES, manufacturing systems, as well as Salesforce? Are you looking at everything, or just mainly that core back office ERP function?
Yeah. Everything is the short answer, and the reason is we're not, a heavy manufacturer. In other words, we're very light. The routings are one or two lines. Print this logo on this product in this position, right? So we're a distributor first, and a decorator slash manufacturer second, and so it does it's a little bit different than some of the other ones I've done in the past.
Right, right, okay. Um, and then when you think about just some of your past experience, then with other implementations you've been involved with, what are some of the three or four major lessons or sort of the major success factors that you would
Mhm.
uh, you've taken away from those experiences that you're applying here at Polyconcept?
So to re-say the question, what are we not going to do here that we did before wrong?
Right, that is a good way to put
Yeah, so we're not going to allow scope creep. Unless there's some kind of compliance or legal reason, we're just not going to allow customization, right? Um, we're not we're not going to treat this. What is the saying? Good, fast, and cheap. Pick two, right? So we want to go fast to the extent that we don't break something. We don't need this thing to be a 2 or 3 years at every division. It really should just get deployed as long as we stay within scope. So we're going to manage that very, very carefully, and no individual is going to have the ability to change that scope decision. Um, we're going to get locked and loaded with the right budget. Um, it's always a bit of a political game to come in there and do the tap dance. Well, I can do this for X millions of dollars, or I can do it in this many months. But there's a lot of data out there that says that most things are under budgeted, and
Right.
the time frames are too short, right? So give people a target that's actually achievable, right? And
Mhm.
that's what we're doing here. We're not getting unreasonable and expecting people to work 20 hours a day to go hit a number that's frankly going to yield a bunch of errors because people are too tired to get it right.
Right.
Keep it simple, start small. We're not going to go through 6 months of blueprinting at each plant. We're going to stand up the software, load the data, and go run a conference room pilot and find out why it won't work, right?
Right.
We're
More of a
going to
gap
come out with
analysis.
a list of things to fix, or maybe a config tweak or this or that, and then we'll do it again. And we'll do it as many times as it takes, but it tends to take longer than people think. So in the past, it's a valid leadership strategy to impose targets out there, knowing you're going to miss them. But most people are smarter than that now. If you put your best and brightest on a team, they'll figure it out fast. you
Right.
know and then you're losing the momentum. People don't trust the dates or budgets they're given, so therefore they ignore them, and that's a losing strategy. Total transparency, and really let the people doing the process tell me how long it's going to take. Send it over to the PMO, run the schedule, and see what it looks like. And if you can't hit a schedule, then go either add resources or descope, right? You gotta move the levers around until it hits everybody's needs.
Right. Yeah. Makes total sense. And then, not to mention the headwinds that you create, from the back to the question that Lippy had about how do you keep the team motivated? There's nothing more demotivating than realizing that we're in a no-win situation where we're not going to accomplish this budget, we're not going to accomplish this timeline, yet we're being pushed to do something that's totally unrealistic.
I'll add one other thing related, because I've tried to follow the industry trends, on what works and what doesn't. And um, fail fast is something I've really started doing a lot in the last several years. Don't kick people when something breaks. Reward them for taking the risk, and then regroup and how are we going to fix it and move on, kind of thing. So it's painful to watch meeting after meeting if somebody's too timid to pull the trigger to see if it works. Stand
Right.
up the software and go see if you can break it. It's a beautiful thing, and then try not to beat people down if they make the wrong decision, because they won't do it twice typically.
Right. Right. Yeah. Now, what about one of your strategies has been one of your growth strategies has been to move into the e-commerce space. How does that whole sort of business model shift or evolution? How does that factor in, or how does that tie back to this transformation, or how does this transformation potentially support that strategy?
Well, by focusing on the front end and the customer interface, which is our website, our EDI links, all the machine to machine stuff. um, by focusing on that, we're figuring out how much of the volume we can shift to an automated sort of order flow and automated status out. So our platform from the customer's point of view are those e-commerce interfaces or websites or whatever they are. So the ERPs need to be built to truly support that journey, right? Think of the Domino's pizza oven status, the Amazon model, those things. You can't build a system now and leave people in the dark if they're paying the bills. right? They want to know, and they don't want to have to get on a phone and call somebody to ask where their order is. So we're building things and processes that are proactively throwing that data out there. So if we're in a supply chain shortage, which a lot of companies are right now, we're going to go proactively. If an order date moves because something's waiting on a boat at a port, then we're going to proactively build those processes to communicate that out, rather than wait and see. So it's changing our approach a little bit, and the successful companies in the world right now are doing it right, and we have to mimic those in a high volume environment.
Right. Now, this actually leads to another question here that is coming from the audience here. And I apologize for my dogs barking in the background. They say hi to the audience here. So the question is from San Antonio, from Roger from San Antonio. He's joining from YouTube, and he says, how would you make a change to an existing business process and know if it will fit into the intended ERP system that has been picked by the C-suite? So it sort of ties back to what you were saying before about blueprint up front, and your business processes up front, and then what you were just talking about as it relates to your business model changing, the evolution of the business model. How do you know if you make a change to an existing process if it'll fit that technology that you might end up choosing later on?
Yeah, and it's a great question. Each specific area is a conversation. So, in other words, we've got a division in Pittsburgh. It's a large division, and they want to do things different on the shop floor as far as how they license plate the inventory and move it through the factory. And so we have to go back and ask our software vendor, how does that work on your system? Right. And so in this case, it's okay that they made the change. The transition to the new platform isn't going to be a challenge. But there's other cases, if they make a change that involves a data field that doesn't exist, for example, over on a new platform, then we'd have to rethink that. There was a question above that talked about centrally managed data versus other. Most companies have some kind of PLM or some kind of central customer database, whether it's Salesforce or others, and we're no different, right? We have that, and so we think of the ERPs as the transaction engines for production and the system of record for accounting and all that. We don't think of it as our customer relationship management solution or any of these sort of corporate things. So where we have things like credit management that cut across all the divisions, we need that customer to be managed up above the ERPs, right? And we need that credit limit established at a higher level and then pushed back down to the ERP. So we have to look at everything happening right now and make a judgment call. And so that, this is a multi-year journey. And so you want to taper back a little bit on some of the radical changes you're doing to make things better on the old process. But we're not going to call it code freeze because nobody should have to wait 2 years to, businesses are always evolving. So it's not easy to the question. It's got to go through this process, the committee. As the ERP team gets smarter and smarter, as the super users learn the new system, then they can answer those questions directly from the business rather than it having to go through a committee. But most plants, we're still at the early cycle where most people don't understand the new solution enough to judge whether a process change to the old solution is going to impact it. So,
right. Yep. That makes sense. Now, Nikki on LinkedIn asked a good question here, which is, should customer data be centrally managed if a number of platforms are used and if direct customers and distribution networks are in play? And that's probably especially relevant here because you have different brands, you have different business units. What are your thoughts there?
For us, it's a hard yes, absolutely hard yes. And customer, we have Salesforce.com as our CRM of choice, and we've got a website out there now that customers are engaging with, and the website allows branches in by customer to whichever brands that they're a customer of. So it absolutely has to be above the ERP. Otherwise, we'd have a different customer experience for each of the brands, which wouldn't be good. And we wouldn't be able to make decisions at the customer level, things like you said, like credit limit or how much are they buying from us. To have it at the central level and feed things into it allows us to see what the book of sales looks like for a customer that might do business across multiple brands, right? And treat them differently. They may all of a sudden become an elite customer because their book of business combined is as much as somebody that's our biggest customer at a single division. So that's the kind of intellectual property you get out of this once you start looking at the data from the high level.
Right. And then another question here from LinkedIn from a audience member from the Netherlands says, what is the most difficult task to guarantee the success of the implementation? Is it to adapt the IT software to the business process? Is it to train employees to use it properly? Is it to push management to implement strategies in a clear vision? What would you say?
I think the most difficult task is to convince people that you selected the right platform for your business and to trust that you're going to run this thing off the shelf, right? You're not going to go re-engineer. You're going to open this thing up and run the process as the software supplier intended it, and not goof with the standard flow of the process because you're used to doing it that way. There's it's kind of like, be careful whose baby you call ugly.
Right.
I mean, the people that are on the team are the ones that built these old processes. So they got pride of ownership. Oh, it works. We've done it this way for 15 years, right? So it's one of the biggest headwinds to take somebody that's really good at what they do and they've done well for the company for years and tell them they're going to have to modify their solution, their process, so that the software will do what it's intended to do. So that's that scope management. I think this is just, more about trends than I do, but I think a lot of ERP deployments fail because of scope creep and heavy mods that are all of a sudden required because your business is so special. There's very few businesses that are that special. And I come from a lot of years of aerospace, and that's a pretty intricate set of processes to deal with. And none of those were even special, to be honest.
Right. Yeah, that's a good point. I think a lot of companies think they're special, or that perceived sense of being special is really a form of change resistance. It's I'm special and I don't want to change. It's really it's code for I don't want to change oftentimes.
Yeah.
So you're gonna have to differentiate between that and the stuff you were talking about earlier, like the regulatory stuff, or there are things that obviously you're unique to your business model or to regulatory needs, but more often than not, some of those feelings of being special are just we don't want to change.
Yeah. So that was a great question, and that's every ERP project that's ever happened has that same problem. So the question was, let me read it here. I'm looking at the chat box on the side. To adapt the software to the process, so we covered that, or is it to train employees to use it properly? So there's a list of questions in there, but I'd say the number 2 is data. It's always data. So your legacy system data is in various states of disrepair and lack of management. A lot of times it's broken. So don't shovel a pile of crappy data into your new system until you clean it up, and resist the temptation to load all your history in your new ERP. Just don't do it. You'll add months and months. Just build a history database somewhere, and don't put all that history in your new system unless there's some real compelling reason to do it, because it'll cross you up. Those are a couple more that I'd throw out.
Yeah. The data one's a good one. It's really easy to get lost in that data cleansing and just trying to make sense of the old data.
Yeah.
Finding that balance of what do you really need versus what, how long is it going to take me to clean that up and to get it ready for production. So I guess just to wrap up the conversation here, what closing advice would you leave with a fellow ERP director, CIO, project team member, or just an organization that's about to go through an implementation or transformation, what sort of closing words of wisdom or just general tips would you leave for that audience?
Well, like I said, I've been doing this 30 years, and we hired you guys. And why did we do that? Because people have biases. I've done SAP, I've done Oracle, I've done 5 or 6 different types of ERPs. Everybody's got a bias. I don't like their sales department, or I don't like their strategy, or this or that. Get an independent assessment, a platform agnostic assessment. Figure out what you need before you pick the platform. Don't spend 6 months with Oracle or SAP having them, because it is beautiful software. They'll bring you to the biggest cities and show you the best demos, and it's fantastic. The problem is they don't tell you what you didn't ask, right? So start by asking the question, what is it you're trying to do here? Because just because your system's 10 years old doesn't mean you have to replace it, right?
Right.
What are you trying to do as a business? And which software platform brings the best functionality to those key areas? So figure out the key areas, pick the platform that's right for them, and then get them in to do a demo and a conference room pilot kind of a situation. But don't do it backwards. That'd be my biggest advice. And the second advice would be, don't limp in. Don't underestimate the cost. The cost of the software is not the most expensive piece of an ERP. The most expensive piece is when it fails 2 years down the road and you've dumped $20 million into something and you have to start over. That's a complete waste. That happens a big percentage of the time. So hire the right people internally, and then hire the right integration partner. Don't hire somebody that's on their first one. They're doing this for the first time. Wait in line for the best, and then it'll go a lot smoother.
Yeah. That's really good advice. I really like your first one. The first response around, have a clear vision and have clear intention and purposes, and don't get too enamored by cool technology, or don't get too alarmed by the fact that you're on an old system, or that you're not in the cloud, or that you're not, insert buzzword here. I think it's easy to get caught up in a lot of that stuff without really realizing or thinking about, well, what does this mean to my business? Does this really help me accomplish my business goals or not? And if not, why am I doing it?
All of the ERP companies have fantastic people, great technology. They all have experts, but they're 100% biased, right? So avoid the commotion of the bias early, and then once you have a selection made, it's fine. It won't hurt anything. They'll bring everything to the table, but it's got to be structured so that you don't get sort of intimidated by a front end technical sales process that leads you down the wrong path with the wrong integration. These guys are really good at selling big deals and cutting costs on the front end when they're going to make it up on the service end on the back. So buyer beware.
Right. Yep. Exactly. Well, good. Well, that's good sound advice, and I really appreciate you being here today to share some of your lessons. I know our team enjoys working with you and the rest of your team, and you've been a great client so far, and so we really appreciate you giving back and sharing some of your lessons so far, and would love to maybe chat with you again in the future as you're even further into the thick of things, and sort of get an update on where you're at and what additional lessons you might have along the way. But in the meantime, really appreciate you being here today, Doug.
Thanks, Eric. Enjoyed it. It was a nice break from normal day, so I appreciate the opportunity.
Absolutely. And one last thing, how can people learn more about Polyconcept, particularly for those corporate people that might want to buy some corporate swag or corporate?
PCNA.com is our public website. We're happy to take your money and sell you some swag.
Right.
Eric, we sent you a couple of samples, and you can say we're the best. We really are highest quality. So whatever you buy, I mean, we've got it. So check it out there, and if anybody's really interested, to find me on LinkedIn. Happy to engage or talk to people. I do it all the time. I used to do consulting before I went down a bunch of other paths. So love to mix it up with the community and talk to people or answer questions. I got nothing to hide. I want to save some people some stress.
Right. Yeah. If you can help people avoid some of the heartache and heartburn that you've had along the way, that's even better, right? Because there's plenty of pitfalls to avoid.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Doug. Thanks for being here, and thank you to the audience for your great questions. I appreciate you joining here today. Please feel free to share this interview with others you think might be interested, and watch out for our Transformation Ground Control podcast that will be released a week from tomorrow. So I guess that would be November 10th. That November 10th episode of Transformation Ground Control will feature this interview among other content that we'll have in that podcast. So thanks for being part of that, helping us create the podcast, and look for us every Tuesday here on LinkedIn, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter. So thanks again, Doug. Thanks to the audience. Have a great week, and we will see you all soon.